So welcome to Brookline Booksmith's author event series, where today we are speaking with Alison Ames, author of It Looks Like Us, and Courtney Gould, contributor to the short story anthology, The Gathering Dark. My name's Alex, and I'm the events director at Brookline Booksmith. I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's spending their Friday with us. Thank you for turning out to support these two lovely and talented authors, and for also supporting an independent bookstore with your ticket and book purchases. We really appreciate it, and we're happy to have you as part of our community. Now, I'm very happy to introduce today's guest authors. Courtney Gould is the author of The Dead in the Dark and the upcoming Where Shadows Lie. Look for it in 2023. She's a self-described author of queer horror fiction and loves a good ghost and a bump in the night. Her short fiction is included in the new folk horror anthology, The Gathering Dark, which has a beautiful cover. In her short story, Third Burn, a young arsonist confronting her estrangement from her little Oregon town is confronted also by the ghosts of the past. Allison Ames is the author of It Looks Like Us, which you should look at up close because there's a lot going on in this smoke that it took me a while to understand. It's brilliant. And To Break a Covenant, I will just take a moment to say that she also is single-handedly responsible for turning me into a horror reader. I'm kind of a weenie, and I was always like, this is not for me. And then after I read To Break a Covenant, which is about being gay and a girl and a teen and an evil mind is haunting your town, I realized that this is an amazing genre. It is a great gateway book. And her new novel, It Looks Like Us, is an incredible follow-up, which takes us deep into the frigid Antarctic with a handful of teens whose lives aren't going that great, and then proceed to go a lot less great as they are haunted by a strange, shape-shifting, terrifying creature which scuttles across the ice. So, two wonderful books, two wonderful stories, two wonderful authors. Please, everybody, give a big welcome to Courtney and Allie. And congratulations to both of you on getting new work published. Courtney, Gathering Dark has been out for a little bit. How has that been so far?
It's been really amazing, actually. It's funny because it's such a different process than writing just like a book on your own. It's such a collaborative process. And I know that there was so much that went into sort of deciding how the stories would be laid out, what order they would go in, what leads into one and another. And so I drafted my story earlier, like I think end of 2021, not 2020, end of 2021. But I hadn't read anybody else's work. I kind of did that in an isolation and submitted it. And so it wasn't until a couple months ago that I got access to the whole book. So reading it in the scope of the entire book was really, really cool. And seeing the way that my story sort of played with other stories and its place in the journey of the anthology was really, really cool. And I mean, the book has been more successful than I could have even imagined. We just got news that we were on the indie bestseller list yesterday, which was a crazy achievement. So it's been a really, really cool, how many times can I say cool?
It's really cool.
It's one really more cool. No, it's just been very exciting, especially since my second book has been pushed out a little bit. And so it was very exciting to have something come out in that middle point, and especially something that I got to do with so many other people.
Can you actually say a little bit about what the anthology's scope is? Because it's a really cool concept.
Yeah, so it is an anthology of folk horror, which part of when we started writing the stories was Tori Bobolino, the author who edited the anthology and who is the wonderful author of The Devil Makes Three and Not Good for Maidens, gave us all a definition of folk horror, because a lot of people were like, I don't quite know what I'm writing, but it's a genre of horror that really focuses on nature, on tradition, and on the, not so much just the paranormal, but the sort of eldritch horror, it lives in the woods, a very vague sort of out of sight horror that really taps into the primal nature of humans and our connection with the earth. And so it's a really neat genre. A lot of examples would be like The Witch, or Stephen Graham Jones's Not or The Only Good Indians was a great example of folk horror, and that's sort of harkening back to tradition. So we had a huge scope of stories that were in the anthology. We had people talking about, lakes that resurrect the dead, about the New Zealand, I think it was Chloe's was in New Zealand, like the countryside with like this connection to this like estate in the middle of nowhere. We had ghost stories. Mine focuses on like witchcraft. So it's a neat genre because it encompasses so many different types of horror, but they all kind of have that similar thread of connection to nature and to the unknown.
Yeah, it's great. It's a little bit different. There are a lot of YA anthologies right now, which I think is great. And it has a slightly different scope than a lot that I've seen come out. Allie, I know that I very briefly described It Looks Like Us, but I would love to hear sort of your pitch of the book.
Oh, it's basically the same as yours, but yeah, so basically our little misfit teens all sign up for this research trip to Antarctica, which is sponsored by a tech company, to search for microplastics in the permafrost to see if pollution has made it that far. And while they're there, Riley, who is the kind of the main, she's the one that we follow, and she has anxiety, which has been a problem for her in her home life, to the point that she starts to see things and feel things, and she's like, no, shush, anxiety brain, like don't do that. And so she eventually accepts that she's right and something is happening, and that something is monster, more or less. And then everyone has to kind of deal with how to overcome internal mental illness demons and then also external monster demon. So that's kind of the very short, it's very, as like an anxiety baby, I was like, okay, we're going to make this work for us, and we're going to think through all of our options, and we're maybe going to make a flamethrower out of something that could conceivably become a flamethrower. But that is the short pitch. Yes. And then as far as like no spoilers go, because it's not out yet, there's a monster.
There's a monster, but we can't
Sure
say
is.
much more. I do like that you though touched on it at, as an anxiety baby, and with your main character as an anxiety baby. I think it's so interesting to watch you approach a truly horrifying situation and sort of consistently parse the difference between like, what are the totally reasonable reactions, and is it possible that you're having a totally reasonable reaction and also somehow an unreasonable reaction because of your anxiety? Like, you should be anxious. So what was it like to try to strike that balance?
It's hard, and I hope that I did okay with it, because I've never been in like mortal danger for longer than like one time I almost drowned very briefly, but that was pretty much the extent of it. But like a couple car accidents, nothing major, but there's not really time for like decision making in those instances. So I've never been in a situation where I have to trust my instincts about danger. And I feel like my instincts generally tell me that there is danger when there's not danger, like just as an anxiety person. So kind of like you said, like parsing that out and being like, okay, she's very nervous about generally interacting with people. Now she's nervous because someone's face seems to be incorrect on their skull. Like, how much can you trust yourself in that situation of like, oh, my instincts have caused me to have panic attacks before for no reason, so maybe I should ride this one out and see if it's actually normal. And it is a hard line to walk, because, and I think also with teens, like there's a lot of impulsivity, which causes them to maybe make decisions that aren't great. There's again, not to do too much spoilers, but somebody at one point was like, why would Day just try to smash the wall with his shoulder? And I was like, great question. He is a 17-year-old boy. That's pretty much the, like, like they're like this, there might be something in there. We got to go in there. Like there's not a whole lot of planning or thought process. And so that kind of, in those moments also, then you have the added level of anxiety thought process, which is like, get away from this, hide from this, run from this, like whatever your like fight or flight or freeze responds to. And then you have to not only maybe ignore that, but then also make a different decision if you've decided to ignore that and you're 16 or 17. So that new decision is not necessarily better than your first instinct. So hopefully I walked the line there okay, but it was definitely, I was like, okay, and if I was being confronted with this, running and screaming, not as much of an option as I would like. So second choice, and then kind of going from there.
I also want to applaud you in this book because both your books are very frightening, but I think you let loose a little bit more with the body horror in this book. It's so alarming. So I just want to say congratulations on being so yucky and powerful.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. It means so much to me that you went through it. It really does.
Yeah.
I did get a review from Booklist yesterday, and the pull quote contains the phrase "delightfully gruesome." And I was like, that's my chest tattoo. Like, right.
Yes.
Slimy yet satisfying. Like, that's what that felt like. I was like, I've done it. I've done something.
So horror is wonderful. We've discussed this, and you're both very clearly like deep readers and viewers of horror. And I'd love to talk a bit about influences, both what led you to horror writing and what might have been an influence in your most recent projects. And Courtney, I think feel free to talk about not just the scope of this story, but your forthcoming book as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that question too, because I feel like I didn't used to be big on horror. Growing up, I was a huge scaredy cat. Like I was afraid of everything. I hated horror movies and I absolutely refused to watch them. And then slowly over time, I think it was around the era of like Haunting of Hill House on Netflix that I started kind of like delving into horror more. And I had noticed that a lot of my writing had sort of been leaning more on the scarier side. I would say that my sort of gateway into horror literature started before that with actually like Gillian Flynn. I remember reading Sharp Objects and it had like that like little like bit of horror in it that I was like, that's nice. I feel like there's a lot that you can explore through this sort of element of human fear. And after that, I feel like my taste in things just started leaning more and more into the scary, to the point where my TBR, all the things I was watching, all of the things that I wanted to consume were just horror all the time. I was looking at my movie list of things I wanted to watch this year, and I realized that it was just every horror movie coming out and nothing else. It's like, I've really changed as a person, I think.
I'm becoming different somehow.
Yes. But I also feel like fiction that I wrote before I started with horror was so much more surface level. I feel like I wasn't really delving into the things that I really wanted to talk about, things about mental illness and about various like trauma informed subjects, where I feel like horror was at the forefront of exploring that in movies and in literature. And I felt like using the genre to really dig into the subjects that were important to me was the easiest way for me to break into that. And so Dead in the Dark was something that I wanted to explore, like the idea of homophobia and small town hatred and that very like rural Americana in isolated community. And I ended up doing that through horror after watching things like, or reading and watching things like Sharp Objects. But I would say that I like Where Echoes Die, which is my book that's coming out in 2023, is more horror than The Dead in the Dark, like times a million. It is very much influenced by like that very strange like desert cult horror. A lot of the like true crime horror documentaries about like isolated communities are what influenced that. And so the premise of that one is that it's a girl who goes to a extremely remote Arizona small town to try and figure out what her mom was writing about before she passed away. And she ends up uncovering some very strange sci-fi elements happening. Never done sci-fi before. So
Very exciting.
first of all, I know that Allison, you have in your projects, and I mean, to an extent.
That's very kind of you. I feel like I'm very scared
I
of
know.
sci-fi.
I'm always like, she's so brave because this is really hard. I was an English major, so but I feel like that was sort of based on, I don't know, it's almost like it wasn't any particular kind of media, but more my actual experience, like driving through the desert and like listening to have you ever listened to like those YouTube videos where they just talk about like weird things that have happened to people when they've been out in the middle of nowhere?
Yes.
Because I used to just listen to those for hours and be like, oh man, the desert is weird.
Before we go to Allie's answer to this question, I have to ask, have you read Katrina Ward's Sundial?
No.
Because if you like weird, cultish desert horror, that's a book that you need to read.
Yes.
Okay, I absolutely do.
Thank you.
So
Also, Last Days by Adam Neville. It's
Okay.
a little more Hollywood desert, but still,
that's okay.
yeah, Sandy cult.
Love it. You said Last Days?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So your influences.
Oh God, when did I become like this? There was a weird there was a weird
When did
period
things
of,
go
like,
wrong?
I was a big reader and not a big friend haver as a child. And I got kind of to a place where I was like, I'm reading some YA, I'm interested, but I'm not that interested. And I found somewhere, I assume it wasn't in my parents' house because I don't think they were that lax, but I found a Stephen King book and I was like, this is what I need more of. And so I went pretty much right from YA directly into like misery. But I still didn't watch a lot of it. I had a friend in high school in like my junior year, was whatever year The Descent came out, because that was the first horror movie that I remember like consciously watching, which is still to this day my favorite. But
That
I
explains
just
so
remember
much.
watching that, and like the first like jump scare of that movie, my friend that I was with, her name was Stephanie, she was like, because we were eating ice cream because we were having a sleepover and watching movies, and she was like, okay, we need to pause it like every 5 minutes because I want to take a bite and I don't want to stab myself in like through my soft palate with this spoon, and if something happens I'm afraid that I'm gonna like jump and do that. So we watched this movie in like 5-minute increments, and then we were so absorbed that we had stopped pausing it by the time the first jump scare actually happened, and both of us like fell and ran and like had to get all of our adrenaline out. So we just did miss like the next 5 minutes of the movie after that. But it was so much fun, and it was so like, we were horrified, but in such a like roller coaster adrenaline way that I was like, oh, I like that. I want more of that. And I think as kind of I've gotten older and the world continues to be the world, like that one comic with the bird with the huge mouth, it's just like the world continues to disappoint me. Like as kind of we get deeper into everything being everything, I feel like the things that like, for better or for worse, I feel like I need a big thing to be able to have a reaction to it. And horror, I think, for better or for worse, is sort of the place where a lot of big stuff happens, or even if it's not big, it's wrong or insidious in some way that it causes you to like actually have to think about it and focus on it. And so I find myself mostly consuming horror just because there's enough of a formula usually that I know what's going to happen. So I feel comforted by that. But then I'm also like, ooh, but I'm going to have a little, my heart's going to race and I'm going to be absorbed for a moment and I'll forget about other stuff. And then I'm safe again, which is a nice change of pace from the world where it's like, someday maybe we'll all be safe again at a much later date. So that's probably so Stephen King and The Descent, I would say, are my sort of my, and then obviously for this specific book, The Thing, hugely. I'm getting a lot of comments that are like, this sounds a lot like The Thing. And I'm like, it should. That's correct. Good noticing. But I think also when I was pitching it, I was describing it as The Thing meets like Alien meets like Scream.
Yes.
Because there's like the isolation and the kind of being trapped with something which you have in The Thing, but not as specific to the environment, I guess. That was not my sound. I'm sorry. I don't know what that
That
was.
was mine. That was my sound.
Okay, as long as I didn't do anything. But then also just with teens and with kind of, I guess we can call Riley a final girl, but kind of that element of, specifically girls surviving against monster that we all love so much. So those were my kind of my primary things that I was drawing on for It Looks Like Us.
So actually want to bring up a point about why we like horror, which is that I did a little bit of research on this, and I am not a scientist, and we should take all of this Googling with a grain of salt. But there have been a few studies that sort of indicate that horror is actually like both physically and psychologically good for us.
Good.
Because it gives us like a good stress and a good way to sort of like process fear, sort of separately from reality fears. So yeah, it seems like actually anxious people can become less anxious when they engage with horror storytelling. So you are not only grappling with mental health, you are providing mental health to others. So
That's what I'm gonna tell my therapist.
That does make sense to me though, because I feel like when you're doing anxiety brain, you're doing a lot of like, what if this, what if this, what if this, what if this?
Mhm.
And so the horror is like, it's this, and it's happening, and now you have to do it. And so like being able to kind of go through that does make sense to me.
Yeah. I feel like that's also sort of part of the writing process for me almost, is that like I generate the things that are like scariest to me. And that's how it's like, I'm like, I can really convey this to somebody. I can make somebody really scared because this scares me. And I don't write something I don't put something in a horror book if it doesn't scare me. And I feel like it's a great way for me to sort of externalize and then process those fears, that I can say, this is something that to me, like fight or flight. And so if I'm able to sort of take this apart, write it out, go over it a bunch of times and really get it on the page and talk about why it's so scary in a way that's going to make other people afraid, I've also sort of conquered it internally.
Yes, absolutely.
It's also, I mean, that's I like the idea that horror is just sort of like organically therapeutic, because it really is about, horror helps us process so many really complex issues, not just like it's scary, but like these are the things that are the ultimate terrors, and this is a story that's going to reflect those terrors, and it's the sort of looking straight at the things that scare you that help you build resilience against them. So yeah, horror is magic, and wonderful, and it does many good things for us, and we should all watch and read more of it so that we become the strongest people, I think, of all time.
Yes.
So I want to go back to the small town element that Courtney was talking about. You write about a lot of small towns, and actually you've said you love to write love letters to small towns and haunted places. And Allie, your first book also has a very close-knit, small town, somewhat isolated community. So what makes the small town such a good locale for scary stories?
I think for me, and I've written now 4 books that are in small towns, so eventually I probably need to branch out here, but I think what makes them so eerie to me is this idea that you can be surrounded by people and bad things can happen and it will not matter to the outside world, that this community is so isolated and so loyal to each other that the normal rules of what we believe about human society don't apply in this place. I think in my experience in like watching horror movies, there's always that moment where like the person who's been isolated, running away from the monster or whatever's happening, they have this moment where they have a brush with like the outside world and there's like that relief, and it always gets snatched away. But for me, that's always like actually the scariest part of the movie, is this idea that there are other people that could help and then they don't. And I think that that's the feeling that I get when I write in small towns, this idea that like the monster could be alive and well here, and there's that element of denial and isolation that makes it so that, like, even though you have people around you, it's not going to help or save you. I find that very spooky.
That's absolutely it. I absolutely agree. Like, it's just like the thing of like, like I have something that I think is weird or wrong about me and I can't share it with anyone. And like, if you did share it, then you would find that, you're not alone, but it's extended to the whole place. And it's like, we're all experiencing this haunting or whatever it is. And if we were to open ourselves up to the outside world, it's possible that we could share it or offload it or make it better, but we don't share. We're a community and we're insular. And so it stays in there, and it like, yeah, that's absolutely what it is, because it's like everything is smaller when everything is scarier when it's smaller. Like if you're in New York and you're being haunted, there's as many ghosts in New York as there are people. So it's less like you can be at the diner and there's a ghost, and it's less ominous when you can leave the diner and then go immediately into a crowd of 6,000 people, as opposed to you leave the diner and there's one person and it's like your weird classmate and no one else, like.
Totally.
Yeah. And there's nowhere to go. Like, small town gives you the closed inness of like, where would we go even if we wanted to get help? Like, the nearest town is however many miles away. It's convenient, but it also is real, because that is scarier than if you can take a bus to the police station or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that is sort of the thing that makes it so scary, is that like that reluctance to open up and to invite in the outside for help makes it just as scary. So I feel like I love that element of it. This idea that like we're alone out here and we have to either conquer this together or fall apart together. And if the whole town goes, how long until somebody notices? It's this very weird, surreal feeling.
Yeah, I'm thinking about books, especially that take place where any of the horror takes place in the city, and it tends to move, it migrates frequently away from the populated areas and move. Like, I was thinking of Gus Moreno's This Thing Between Us, for example, does that, where initially it's like, oh, the scary thing is an Alexa that doesn't stop working no matter what you do. And it's like that sort of pitched is the premise of the book, but it's actually only at the beginning. And the real terrors are like grief and a monolith in the middle of the woods that haunts you. So
woods monolith
as an example. Yeah. Oh, that's a great book. You should definitely check that out.
What's the name of that one?
This Thing Between Us.
Okay. My list is getting long over here.
I know, I love this. I'm getting so many.
It's always good to leave any event with like a big new stack of books that you have to check out. But this
it's hard to do like apartment horror. Like, it can be done, but it's also like, well, it's also because we say this all the time when we're watching horror movies, we're like, nobody ever has pets in a horror movie, which is, it has to be that way, because if I hear something crash in the kitchen, I'm like, which animal is destroying my home? Like, I'm never like, I have to go investigate right now the scary noise. I'm like, Lilu has decided that she hates me more today than usual, and she's like knocking glasses onto the floor. And like, nobody has pets, nobody has neighbors, because that's like, you can't have anything to explain it away, because they have to explain it away in like a gaslighty way. If it's, if it's traditional horror, the husband has to be like, well, honey, it's not, it's you, we've just moved and your nerves aren't settled or whatever. But you can't, like, if they also have neighbors that are loud, that's a bridge too far. You have to know that he's gaslighting her, or else it doesn't work.
Yeah, you have to change your themes, like the things that are frightening in the city can't be quite the same things that are frightening about a more rural setting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So speaking specifically about young adult, this is a great category for young adult right now. There are lots of great YA horror novels, lots of great writers. Is there a reason that this is the category that you've both sort of gravitated towards?
Courtney, I feel like I just talked. I feel like I want you to go first.
Okay, I'll go first. I feel like at the time that we sold The Dead in the Dark to Wednesday Books, there was sort of the beginning of the really big YA horror boom. I certainly was not the first one in that category, and I would say probably the first really big like sapphic horror in YA that I remember was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. And I think from there it sort of blossomed out to a bunch of other people. But I remember just feeling like, you know, I had already been writing The Dead in the Dark when that book came out, and I read it and I was like, oh, you're allowed to be like really weird. Like I can get like freaky with it. I can have, you know, body horror, all of these things that I thought were sort of off limits to a young adult audience. I remember as I was writing The Dead in the Dark, I was able to sort of delve more into it, and that was what made the genre so fun. When I first started writing it, I didn't really think of it as a horror book. I kind of thought of it more as like a Raven Boys-esque rural Americana, just like contemporary fantasy. But as it went along and I was reading more horror and watching more horror, I was like, I feel like I can really get into the very scary elements of this and actually express what I'm trying to say more. And it was the beginning of young adults starting to allow that and starting to market that and not sort of like shuffle it away, because I remember seeing YA horror since I was a young adult. But it was never really big. And so it was nice, you know, we had Wilder Girls. And then I remember The Taking of Jake Livingston was one that I had read early on, and a couple of other books where I had met authors and read them. And I was like, okay, I feel like we're able to sort of make a shift in YA now and really start to do this genre that everybody kind of always assumed was only for adults, for teens. And it was really fun to get into. And now it's really fun to see the amount of horror for teens that's out there. And there are so many talented horror writers that are writing for teens. It's just very encouraging.
It is. It's wonderful to see. And it's weird to me that it didn't, like, there's been, you know, here, I feel like horror in general is kind of like having a moment right now, which annoys me to say because I want it to always be having a moment. But
right.
I just like horror movies, like historically, like until very recently, which is the other thing I get cranky about, is when people are like, Hereditary, the first good horror movie in 600 years. And I'm like,
wrong.
Let's calm down. Let's not forget where we came from. But I feel like so many of the horror movies of like our formative years are teens. Like it's always teens versus horror. And I feel like it's an easier, like, not to say any writing is easy, but for me, teens versus horror makes more sense to me than adults versus horror, because teens are much more willing. Like if a ghost appears in front of a 17-year-old, they're gonna be like, oh shit, a ghost, and then go from there. And if a ghost appears to you and you're 38, you're gonna be like, I have not had enough water today, and there's probably a gas leak in my home, and like the paint is probably very old. Like there's going to be so many layers that you have to get through before just being like, now we're haunted and we must deal with it. And so I like the immediacy of YA, because I feel like that's a lot of the thing of YA is like, you know, the Hunger Games is bad, we must overthrow the Hunger Games. Like you can't really do that like point A to point B when you're a grown-up and you're like participating in the structure of the Hunger Games because your children have to eat and so on and so forth. Like it's the same thing with horror, where there's more reasons why you can't and more reasons that you come up with to explain things away. And that's why like horror movies for adults have to be more about like trauma and like intergenerational scarring and whatnot, which is wonderful. And I love that we're doing that in horror, but also like when it comes down to like a tight 90, like somebody with a knife chasing you, like that's usually going to be teens, because teens will react to that as it's happening, like in the moment with it. And so for me, that's always like a much easier, like the one that I just finished writing is adults, and there's a lot more like dithering in that, which is they're like, they're like, well, are we sure? Do we think we're dead? Is it possible that we're, you know, having a group hallucination, and why are we doing that? And like, where can we go? And how can we, is there someone we can call? And it's just much less.
Someone you can call when you've died. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like it's much more like, may I speak to the manager of horror, which is something that you don't really expect as a teen. Like, you're like, nobody's going to fix my problem for me. Like, I can't, like, I'm going to go pull on somebody's like coat and be like, I'm afraid of a ghost. And they're gonna be like, okay, bye. You know, so you have to do that yourself. And when you're an adult, you're like, well, I don't know how to fix my dishwasher. I have to call someone for that. And if you're a teen and you're home alone and the dishwasher breaks, you're going to make an effort. Like, I feel I would have. So that's why I think the teens are a good fit for horror, I guess. And I also just, mindset wise, I guess I'm still there. So more often than not, I'm like, who's my main character? Oh, she's just like me. She's 17. And then I'm like, wait, self.
Well, that's some of the things that make YA horror unique. Are there and the things that you can access through it? Are there things about writing YA horror that are particularly challenging, or like constraints that you've run up against? Because Courtney, you said that there are fewer constraints than you would have expected. But are there things that make YA horror difficult in a way that's unique from adult horror?
I think for me, and this is sort of a larger divide between adult and young adult in general. But I recently finished an adult horror as well. And I feel like there is a little bit more freedom to really get into the faults of your character. I think that I love young adult, and I absolutely love writing it. I think that the themes are so fresh, and I think that young adult is able to be so inventive. But I do feel like talking about the flaws that your characters have, the mistakes that they've made, and not necessarily justifying them or moralizing them is hard to do in YA. I think that there's an expectation that there is going to be like a lesson taught to your readers, and that your characters in the end, though they may do things wrong, they are good people, and that, you know, they will have learned and redeemed themselves. And there's something that the children will be able to, you know, finish your book and take away at the end of it. And I do enjoy doing that. And I think that it's fun to sort of pose this idea in my books. What is my character learning? And what is my reader going to be able to take away from that? But I think that there's a messiness and sort of a raw, like, human element to adult that is a little bit easier. And I don't think that this is necessarily something that can't be fixed in YA, because I do think that if we were allowed to be a little bit messier with our characters and not have to bring everyone back around and have them make all the right decisions and, you know, say the right things and treat everybody super well, I do think that that would be good for teens as well. But I think right now at this moment in publishing, it's harder to do.
I've definitely seen that. And I'm curious to see sort of, you know, things come and go in publishing always. And I'm sort of interested to see what the next modes of young adult are like.
Yes.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like we're in a moment where, like, we're not quite in very special episode territory, but a lot of times it feels like there are people who would like us to be in that territory. The one that I fully agree with everything Courtney said, but I think also just like time in general, like time to sit around and like just do the dumb things that I want my brain to do. Like the one that we have on sub right now is like 120,000 words maybe, which is like, you would never, like, if I sent my agent a book and I was like, this is YA, it's 120K, she would be like, go home and cut
absolutely
half of that off and then bring it back. Like YA, there's like, you can get a little bit into stuff, but everything's kind of moving, you know, because you have like a time frame and you have a time limit, which again is your tight 90, you know, hour 37 clueless horror. Like you have a certain amount of time to get through something, so there's only so far, you know. There's like less like stylistic stuff that you can do, again, because you just don't have the room, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I don't always want to read a novel where someone was being very precious. Like there's a time when I'm like, oh, I'm very proud of myself for writing that. And I'm like, would I want to read this right now? Absolutely not. Like, I want something straightforward. But I definitely think that I do also, just constraint wise, and Page Street has been very, very kind and lovely to me, and I appreciate them so much. Courtney actually said to me after she read It Looks Like Us, she was like, I really love that Page Street just lets you like be a freak. And I was like, well, thank you so much. They really do. But I didn't know that to be an indie next book, you could only say the F word once.
You taught me that. I was like,
yeah, I learned that from somebody
Oh my
else, and they were like, oh, I guess that's why I was disqualified. And I was like, I guess that's why I was never even a thought in the mind of whoever makes that list. But we do have an
Wow.
Australian
I didn't realize that
version.
we're in the 1930s film industry here at
Right.
Indiana.
But so we did an Australian version of It Looks Like Us, which I'm very excited about. But they came back and they were like, can you cut down the swearing? And I was like, yeah, if you feel like, I feel like it's pretty realistic based on my knowing of teens, but like, sure. But I was like, so we had to have a whole conversation where I was like, do you want, like, is it like there's 100 F words and you want 50 F words? Or is it like you said the F word and I want the S word? Like, is it quality or quantity, but like, what is so then we had to like have that conversation. But I mean, honestly, I should be surprised probably that they let me swear as much as I do. And probably the Australians are being reasonable, but I was surprised by that, just based on like teens in general that I know. And like, we live by a high school, so I'm constantly just like hearing snippets of like, it's a fucking basketball. I'm like, yeah, it is. I bet it is. But that was a surprise. And again, Page Street, very, very generous with everything. And they were like, if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. Like, those are your F words, and you can say no if you want. I was like, I'm not that attached to them. I just use them a lot. Like, that's a me problem. But that was the thing I was surprised by. But yeah, I think most of the time, horror wise, like, I've never been told, I guess maybe this is my goal, or it should be, I've never been told anything is too scary. I think they're still more worried about like sexy stuff. Like, I don't know when there would be time for it in anything that I've written, but I've never written like a very sexy sex scene for the YA. And I feel like I can write the like eyeballs peeling out or whatever. But if I'm like, and then they explored each other's bodies, they're going to be like, this might be a little bit, I don't know. And it's possible that they wouldn't, but just based on the industry, it seems like people are more concerned with their children reading about like consensual underage interactions than they are about, murder.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I remember, it's interesting. I love that Page Street is so open about stuff. And I noticed this in Gathering Dark too, that I was reading through, and some of the material that was in people's stories, I was like, Page Street says don't
dark. It was really dark.
I summoned something.
Gathering Dark. You gathered it. Right, I
did.
There.
It got dark.
It assembled. No, I was reading through, and I just remember being surprised about some of the things that people were able to include, and kind of wishing I had gone wilder with mine. But it was interesting when we first were selling The Dead in the Dark. There was actually a bit of one of the imprints that wanted to publish it was like, it has to be you can't have teens dying, you can't have like stuff like they were really like, we can do horror, but it can't be that horror. And I think on the sliding scale of like extremely very scary to like dipping your toes into horror, The Dead in the Dark falls more on this side. But I remember being kind of shocked that one imprint was like, no, go ahead, make it scary, and the other one was like, you can make it kind of scary.
Yeah.
Remember that there are teens.
No dying teens in a horror novel. Yeah,
they said none.
Okay.
I don't know what they wanted me to do with all of the dead teens.
You terrorize them and then you set them free at
Give
the
them
end.
A little scare, push them over, and then they're fine.
Just lightly bully them with fear, and then
Yes. And they learn something, and it'll be fine.
Yes, and then they learn, exactly. And then the little
we weren't dealing with a serial killer,
by.
we were dealing with a serial bullier.
And that's the real horror.
Isn't this basically American Vandal?
What was that?
Isn't this basically American Vandal that we're describing?
Oh,
Yes.
I think so.
Serial
I've seen-
Bullier is
yeah.
exactly how I would pitch that show.
Okay, so speaking of teens not dying, what are 2 things that you would give a protagonist if you wanted her to survive her book?
In our books specifically, or just
In a horror scenario,
a horror scenario?
what would you give her if you wanted her to live to the end?
A phone charger.
Ooh.
I feel like their phones are always dying, and
Yeah.
that's like 80% of the problem. And a ticket to a different place.
Just get out of book free card.
Yes.
The phone
I was
charger.
gonna say, all of my stuff is in like a little town that, is being specifically terrorized. So I'm like, I don't know, get on a bus.
Right,
and
just
go
a
to
car.
Portland. Yeah. I would give her a car and a full tank of gasoline, and she's gonna be fine.
Yep. I would say, God, specific to mine, I would say, I mean, we got to the flamethrower, but I would say something that can create fire is probably pretty high up there. And then I think this is probably just me and being, well, okay, I'm gonna go 2 different ways. So I would say either sharp implement of some kind for digging or prying or whatever, if you are stuck in an enclosed space. But then I also feel like if you're going to be stuck in an enclosed space, it might be better to have snacks, because maybe somebody will, maybe like you got separated and then they'll come get you in time. Because I worry that whatever the sharp implement is not going to be enough to like free you from the mine or whatever, like in the cave-in. So I'm like, but if you have sustenance,
Everything's easier with calories.
right, and you think better, you're not having such
Just a box of Cheez-Its.
just a pocket, just a big pocket.
One big Ziploc of trail mix and you are good.
Yes. And then no matter how deep in the mine you are, you can just keep on circling that labyrinth, just like another cashew.
Let's see. So we have a couple of things in the Q&A. Tori says, I know this isn't a question. I just really had to say to Allison that I grew up in Texas, and whenever we had standardized testing days, the only things we were allowed to do after the tests was read or sleep. My father's a huge Stephen King fan, and we were running late on a standardized test day, and I needed a book. So he shoved The Shining into my hand and ended up getting called into school for a meeting because my 4th grade teacher didn't believe that my dad had given me that to read.
Good.
So
Incredible. Oh, bless your dad. Bless you both. That is, oh my God, I can't even imagine. Just seeing just like a little, are you 9 when you're in 4th grade? Just seeing a 9-year-old just like, this is my book that I brought from home. And you're like, oh, have you gotten to the dog man yet? Oh no.
To any of that.
Dan, I love Dan. Tell him he has a fan.
Aw.
And Amber has a question, which is, what are your top book suggestions for teens who are just starting to read horror and get scared easily? It's good to start slow, ramp up.
So I feel like I did peek into the Q&A ahead of time. So I was like, let me start writing these down, because the minute anybody asks me to come up with book recommendations, I have none. I've never read in my life.
You're so wise, because that's where I'm at. I'm like, have I ever read a book?
Right. So I would say for teens that are just wanting to start with horror, a couple of my favorites would be The Valley and the Flood by Rebecca Mahoney, which is sort of hybrid like horror and contemporary fantasy. And it's about a girl whose best friend has recently passed away, and she's driving from Texas to California, and her car breaks down in the middle of nowhere in Nevada, and she hears a radio signal broadcasting the last voicemail that her friend left for her. And so she follows it into this like weird town in the middle of nowhere. It is wonderful. It's scary, and it's, it'll make you cry and give you nightmares. It's so good. but it's not so scary that you're gonna be like, I can never read horror again. So I would say Bad Witch Burning by Jessica Lewis was another one that
Yes.
I absolutely loved, about a teen who can contact ghosts, and she makes like, small change just talking to people's dead relatives, but she realizes that she has the ability to resurrect the dead, but that comes at a cost. And it is like equal parts scary and funny and heartbreaking, and I absolutely love that one. And I would say also The Devil Makes Three by Tori Bobolino. And I know that I'm plugging that after she just edited Gathering Dark, but she is an excellent horror writer, and that one's another kind of horror, dark academia, contemporary fantasy about a girl who works in a library and ends up accidentally releasing a demon from a book and has to work on dealing with that problem. And it's romantic and scary, and I really love it.
Okay, yes to all of those. I think, okay, there's a couple that aren't specifically. I think Anya Alborn is a good author to be in the neighborhood of. I think that she does horror, but in a way where you would feel able to like dip your toe in, and if you're not, like, it's gonna be pretty apparent, like the parts that are scary are gonna be scary. I think also Mindy McGinnis does, like, I wouldn't say that anything that she's done is horror, but I think that there are horrifying elements and some like more thrillery areas that can get a little bit scary. And so if they can get through those and they feel good about those, then I would say that's kind of a good stepping stone to maybe like me or Courtney's first book area. I had one where Karen Dion, which isn't YA. Again, I'm sorry that none of these are YA. I'm like, Catriona Ward though also, I know we talked about Sundial. That's maybe not a beginner,
No,
but
let's not give that to
maybe-
children.
I feel like Last House on Needless Street wouldn't be out
Boy.
of the question. No? Am I
It's pretty
broken?
intense.
Okay.
Allison's scale
I feel
for what's
Okay,
scary
yeah,
is-
maybe take all of mine with like a grain of maybe
The Last
ease
House
into
on
that,
Needless Street is, however, a wonderful book. It is
right?
so
I
good.
need to finish reading it.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
trying
you have to finish reading it because you don't know how wonderful it is until you get to the ending.
Okay, I have it
Yeah.
on my cloud reader. I'm ready.
Yes. I feel
Um,
like all of the YA horror that I want to recommend is either really scary or like stuff that Courtney already said that is people that are our friends. Which, I mean, they're good and I want to recommend them and I wholeheartedly endorse those recommendations, but I'm like specifically in the neighborhood of scary but not that scary. I'm having a hard time parsing.
Mhm.
If you have a younger teen, I would say Small Spaces by Catherine Arden is really good.
Ooh,
She's the author of Bear and the Nightingale, but she has a collection of four middle grade horror novels. And the first one is about kids who go on a field trip to a farm, and then there are evil scarecrows. It is
No.
phenomenal. So it is
Yes.
scary, but there's like no gore, and it's for those of us who were raised in the 90s, it's like goosebumps level scary. So it is genuinely scary, but it's not going to be too nasty for somebody who's sort of like easing in.
Yeah.
I feel like
those are great.
also in that vein, I feel like some of Stephen Graham Jones's stuff would be like Mongrels, I feel like would be a really good, like there's
Okay.
a little, like the horror element is there, but it's much more of a coming of age, like with horror elements. Maybe Night of the Mannequins, that one's pretty quick. It's not too, like it's a little campy, so that might be okay.
I would also say Erica Waters would be a good one that sits on that periphery between like contemporary fantasy and horror, especially her newest book, Restless Dark, which is coming out, I think, next week.
That sounds
Is that one is The Restless Dark, which she was laughing because she's in The Gathering Dark, and she's like, I have two books coming out the same month, and it's The Gathering Dark and The Restless Dark. How am I supposed to keep this straight? But The Restless Dark is, I believe, it's been a while since I've read it, but it was about these teens joining like a competition from a true crime podcast to like find any clues in a missing persons case out in like the Ozarks. And it is very spooky, but also very, it doesn't have the gore and some of the like really like unsettling fear that a lot of adult horror has, but it definitely gives you that feeling that horror does. Oh, and I see people saying Weight of Blood by Tiffany Jackson, and I would say that one and White Smoke would be great for newer horror readers.
I think Year of the Witching also.
Oh yeah.
Is that
Alexis Henderson?
I that feels right. Year of the Witching is for sure the title. Alexis, I'm gonna look it up.
I think it's Alexis Henderson. I think her new one is House of Hunger, which also looks very good.
Ooh.
Dead Flip by Sarah Farazan has also been raised, and that came out just a few weeks ago. And yeah, that's a lot of fun.
It is Alexis Henderson.
Evil pinball, 80s.
Oh wow.
Sarah knows how to have a good time, so I think that's a great choice.
That sounds excellent. I see somebody saying The Depths by Nicole L'Esperance, which I just did a blurb for earlier. And that one is also very, like, it's spooky, but also really kind of fun. It's gothic, but like on an island. It's very cool.
We are almost out of time, but we have 2 more questions.
Oh, Horrid. Great. I knew I recognized that name. It's Horrid. I loved Horrid.
Do you have any tips on how you develop your characters?
That's a great question. For me, because in most of the things that I've written, and I know this is different for Allison, but I have a sapphic romance in everything that I write. And so I feel like a lot of the way that I develop, at least my main characters, is sort of in tandem with each other. I'm always trying to figure out, there's always one character that if I know what the book is going to be about, because that always comes to me first, if I know that it's about like, The Dead in the Dark was about this idea of like who gets to call places home, and the idea of rural Americana being welcoming to some people and not welcoming to others. I was thinking, who's a character who is going to highlight this idea? And so if I'm thinking of like an outsider who doesn't have any attachment to any kind of home and who, doesn't have this feeling of community, then I can sort of start there and juxtapose that with a second character who is going to need to learn something from her, but also is going to be able to teach her something. So I'm thinking, okay, now I need somebody who's an insider who understands the value of community, but maybe hasn't seen the light yet on who gets to call places home. And so I feel like for me, starting there when I develop my characters and always thinking, what am I going to have this character teach? And what am I going to have this character learn from the other main character, their foil? That's usually the development process that I use. And then as I draft, my characters are never quite where they end up when I first draft the book. And when I go back through, I generally have a much better idea after writing a whole book with them. I'm like, okay, we've come a long way. I feel like I know you much better now. Let's start from the beginning and try this again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say a similar, like, I knew that Riley was going to be Riley, and I knew that she was going to be the one that was like, started off the book being like, hey, I'm about to tell you about some terrible stuff that happened. And then so she was always there, and she became more formed and more anxiety riddled as we progressed. But I think a lot of it is, and I hate saying this because it makes me sound not professional, but that's probably accurate, but a lot of it is just vibes. So I'm like, oh, we're having a conversation and she needs to like learn this piece of information, but the person that's talking to her currently would not deliver that information to her. Like, so whoever I have next, if I came up with Luke next and she was talking to Luke and I was like, somebody needs to tell them something about math. I'm like, that guy's not going to be Luke. So now I need a third guy, I need a math guy. And then he's going to come in. And so it starts out very like bare bones, like who are sort of the, like, who is holding this together? Who are the pillars that are holding this together? And then as we progress through, I learn more about them, because as you're writing, you can kind of feel like, oh, I don't actually think that she would do that. Like, as I'm making her do this, I'm like, that either needs to not be her, it needs to not happen, because it's not like something about that is just not correct. And the same thing kind of happened with To Break a Covenant, where there's less like action in that one. So this one was very dictated by like, they have to be over here by this point, they have to be doing this, they have to come up with this plan because they have to get here. So all of them are sort of mission oriented in their own way. But To Break a Covenant was much more like me trying to shoehorn them into the plot that I wanted, which ended up not working, and that plot is now gone. But like trying to make them do things that they would not necessarily do was like, I learned about them in reverse because I was like, wow, this is really not working and it's horrible and I don't understand why. And it was like, oh, because that's not correct, you're doing something incorrect. So yeah, it does unfortunately take writing the whole book, I feel like. But once you've done that, like as you've spent that time with them, then you can go back and be like, oh, I really definitely made Luke say something about math up here, and we've decided he's not the math guy. So like, let's go ahead and just take that all the way back to like, he's the predator guy. Like we have a different guy for other stuff. So that I do think that the most helpful way to do it is to give, like, at least for me, like I give myself a very broad, like there's 5 of them because 5's a good number. One of them needs to be sciencey enough to do science. One of them needs to be brave enough to do not anxiety stuff. Beyond that, I just know that there's 5 of them, and then just kind of seeing what needs they need to fill and then going from there.
All right, we have one last question. Are there any horror universes, book, movie, television, etc., that you would absolutely kill to write in?
That's so good. Feel like I can think of like 3 for very different
Okay,
reasons.
You can do 3.
Okay, I was gonna say, don't make me pick one. So the one that comes to mind first, just because I think that it is right in the wheelhouse of what I like to do with horror, would be the sort of Netflix Hill House, Bly Manor, those ones. I feel like I would just like go right in there, and I feel like I could write a season for them and be totally on par with, or not on par, but like on track with what they've been doing. Like I feel like I would really like to be in that universe with this idea of like ghosts and trauma, and it's a big scary house. I think that also in terms of like the small town aspect, it would be something that I would like to do. I don't like clowns though, and
I think
not
not
I'm going to explore this fear.
Like, great. If you don't like clowns, that makes you more qualified.
And I'm like, I don't know if that's a fear that I want to explore as much as I want to just separate myself from that. And then the one that I thought of actually first, just because I recently watched this movie and I loved it so much, and I don't think I could write in it because I don't think I could be that inventive, but I watched Nope and I absolutely loved it. It had all of the things that I like love about horror. It had like a weird monster and an isolated setting in the desert and like some crazy shenanigans and really interesting nuanced characters. I was, if I could write in the sort of world that story took place in, that would be the dream.
I love that. I would, if it had not already been written and invented, it's The Darkest Gathering again. I'm gonna keep doing that. That's my one joke that I have. If it hadn't already been written, I would kill to have written It Follows, which I think is just one of the best, scariest, like, I don't think there's a sequel that you could do. I don't think that there's like a universe where I could somehow contribute, but I just like so deeply wish I had been involved in that. But as far as stuff that like conceivably there's a world where I could do something with, I would love to be in the Alien universe. I would love to get any kind of, or like, I mean, even what they've done with Predator, which like is obviously a very fun franchise, but Prey, like, instead of, because the sequels, like everything just keeps getting bigger, and Alien is kind of doing the same thing that Prey has done, where they're going smaller and they're going backwards, and they're going like, they're trying to explore new avenues as opposed to just like, it's the same thing, but more and more and more. But so I feel like in the Alien universe where they're kind of branching with Covenant and there's room for smaller stories, I think that I would like to be in there in kind of alien mythology area. And then now that Scream doesn't have Neve Campbell anymore, I don't know about it, but if she were to be back, like I would love to, or like even like Hallie, anything with a final girl that has spanned generations at this point. So like a Halloween or a Scream, like any of the ones, like I love the Jamie Lee showing up and she's 70 or whatever. And she's like, I'm going to stab Michael Myers in the face. I'm like, I would love to, that would bring me such joy to participate in as a creator. I would love to do something like that. But they also already did Gerald's Game, which would be one that I would have said that I would have loved to see adapted and to adapt. And I think they did a really, really good job with it. And also, I mean, obviously the Hill House, Mike Flanagan in general, if there's like a Mike Flanagan cinematic universe, I would love to be, I would love to be involved in that. Yeah. I'm like, Mike, can I just slip you this manuscript and then you can decide I'll just be here on the sidelines. But yeah,
maybe if we approach Mike together, he will let us help.
I think so. I think if there's two of us approaching him randomly, that'll make him much more open to the possibility.
Or maybe much more intimidating and he'll have to say yes.
Also true. He seems like he could be intimidated. He seems like he's probably nice.
We gotta get him.
We gotta get him.
Well, we are out of questions. We are out of time, which is terrible. It's been so fun to talk to you both. And I just want to say congratulations again on all of your new work. If you haven't bought these books yet, you can buy them from us. You can even buy them on the page where you signed up for this event. We're very excited to get them into your hands. Yes, It Looks Like Us is going to be out a little later than it was supposed to be, but we'll get it to you when it is with us. Again, this has been just lovely. And I want to say thank you to everybody for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.